The night seemed like any other for Jorge, a successful businessman whose schedule was filled with commitments and high society events. However, there was something different about that night. A heavy rain was pouring down on the city, transforming the streets into a maze of reflections from car lights and street lamps, as if the very sky were weeping. Jorge, dressed in an impeccable suit, adjusted his watch as his driver took him to one of the year's most anticipated charity events. He was prepared to deliver a speech on the importance of supporting vulnerable communities, a message he believed in wholeheartedly. Yet at that moment, he had no idea that the true lesson would not be delivered by him that night, but to him. As the car slowed near the luxurious hotel hosting the event, Jorge was surprised by a scene that captured his attention unexpectedly. Under the dim light of a street lamp, a young woman was sitting at a bus stop, trying to shield her baby from the rain with a thin, tattered blanket. Water streamed down the soaked fabric, almost as if it were trying to reach the baby she held tightly. The woman's gaze met Jorge's for a brief moment. Despite the evident fatigue in her eyes, there was a spark of dignity, a silent plea for help that seemed to echo above the sound of the rain. Jorge felt his heart tighten. He knew that many people faced unimaginable hardships, but seeing it so closely felt different. For a moment, he hesitated. He could move on, as many likely would, justifying himself with thoughts like, "I can't solve everything alone," or "There are organizations to handle this." But something within him, a mix of empathy and a sense of responsibility, compelled him to act. He asked the driver to stop the car and got out, ignoring the rain that soaked his expensive shoes and dripped down his perfectly adjusted tie. The woman looked at him with suspicion, as if she was used to being ignored, or, worse, treated with disdain. Jorge approached slowly, his hands visible, trying to convey calm. "Good evening. My name is Jorge," he said, his voice filled with a kindness that felt unusual for the context. "I noticed you are here in the rain, and I would like to help. My home is not far from here. It's a safe place for you and your baby to spend the night. Please accept." The woman, whose name was Natalia, looked visibly moved, but also hesitant. Living on the streets had taught her to distrust strangers, especially those who seemed to come from a world completely different from hers. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. Jorge thought for a moment before responding, "Because I can, and because no one should face a night like this without a safe place." Without insisting further, he handed his keys to Natalia and called his driver, who helped her into the car. "He will take you there," Jorge said, leaning toward the window. "Please don't worry, it's the least I can do." As the car pulled away, Jorge stood for a moment in the rain, watching the red lights of the taillights disappear into the mist. He knew that his decision would change the night for Natalia and her baby, but he still didn't realize that it would also change his own life irreversibly. Inside the car, Natalia held her baby tighter. The little child, seemingly oblivious to the drama of the night, was wrapped in her damp blanket, but now appeared more at ease. Natalia looked at the keys in her hand and then at the driver, who offered her a gentle smile. "Is Mr. Jorge always like this?" she asked, still trying to comprehend the generosity of that stranger. "Always willing to help those in need," she added. The driver, an experienced man who had worked with Jorge for years, smiled. "He has a bigger heart than he lets on. But tonight, I think he acted for something greater. Maybe fate, maybe God." Meanwhile, Jorge arrived at the event, his mind still caught on the image of that woman and her baby. He entered the brightly lit hall, filled with well-dressed guests, but felt the weight of the scene he had just witnessed. The irony didn't escape him. He was there to raise funds for people in vulnerable situations, while outside, one of those people had become real to him, with a face, a name, and a story. And so, even before stepping onto the stage to deliver his speech, Jorge realized that the night had already taught him a valuable lesson. True change begins when you choose to act, even if it's for a single life at a time. In the luxurious hall, filled with bright lights and soft music, Jorge tried to compose himself after what he had just experienced. He mingled among the guests, receiving greetings and cordial smiles, but his mind remained fixed on that image. A young woman, Natalia, holding her baby under the rain. Despite being surrounded by abundance and warmth, he felt a profound unease, as if that scene had broken something inside him. When it was time for his speech, Jorge took the stage to applause, but he didn't begin immediately. He observed the people in front of him, elegant and assured, and realized he needed to adjust what he had planned. His words needed to come from a different place now, a more real and urgent place. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, upon arriving here, I witnessed something that completely changed my perspective. I saw a young woman and her baby sitting under a torrential rain, with no place to go, no shelter to call home. In a matter of seconds, our gazes crossed, and in that moment, something changed within me. I couldn't just turn away, and I wonder how many of us could also not do the same. His voice carried a palpable emotion that silenced the hall. Jorge continued, now walking slowly across the stage, as if he was speaking to each person individually. We are here tonight to raise funds and talk about the need to help others. But before discussing numbers or goals, I want to talk about something that cannot be measured. Empathy. It's not just feeling pity or sympathy. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and allowing that to move us to act. And that is what brought me here tonight. He then shared the gesture he had made just before entering the event, recounting how he had offered his home to that woman and her baby. Jorge emphasized that it wasn't about charity out of obligation, but an instinctive response to what he felt. When life presents us with opportunities like this, we should not hesitate. I believe that each of us is called to take action in some way. The guests listened attentively, many with discreet tears in their eyes, touched by the sincerity and weight of those words. Jorge continued, challenging them to think beyond their comforts. How many times have we come across stories like this and just moved on? How often do we believe someone else will take action? We can't always wait. Compassion demands that we become the change. As Jorge spoke, the image of Natalia and her baby remained vivid in his mind. He recalled the exhaustion in her eyes, the vulnerability of the baby, but also the strength she demonstrated, even in such a difficult situation. That brief interaction reminded him of how we all carry invisible battles, often ignored by those around us. As he concluded, Jorge made a direct appeal that resonated in the absolute silence of the hall. I want you to think about what it truly means to help. We are not here just to make financial donations, although they are important. We are here to recognize the humanity in each person, to offer more than words and speeches, to extend our hands. Today, I was reminded that empathy is not a passive feeling, it is a call to action. The applause that followed was intense, but Jorge did not perceive it as a personal triumph. He knew that despite the moving words, true change would come from what each person did when leaving that hall. Still, he felt that something special had happened. By sharing that experience, Jorge had planted a seed in the hearts of his listeners, a reminder that in a world often marked by indifference, small acts of compassion have the power to transform lives, including our own. That night, Jorge stepped down from the stage with a lighter heart, but with a renewed sense of purpose. What he had done for Natalia and her baby might just be the beginning of something much larger. And as the rain continued outside, he hoped that his words had reached more than just ears. He wished to have touched souls. After the speech, Jorge was greeted by many attendees who praised his words and the genuine emotion he had conveyed. But deep down, he knew that words, no matter how powerful, did not change realities on their own. As he retreated to a quieter corner of the hall, his mind returned to Natalia and the baby. He wondered how they were at that moment, and if she truly felt safe accepting his help. The event continued with auctions and announcements of substantial donations, but Jorge, although satisfied with the financial results, could not help but reflect on something deeper. Helping Natalia directly had been a personal gesture, but he knew there were thousands of Natalias scattered throughout the city and the world, often invisible to those who could offer help. This invisibility, he thought, was perhaps one of the greatest barriers to change. As he took a sip of water, Jorge recalled his late father's words, who often told him, One hand alone can relieve a little weight, but it is the united hands that truly transform the world. He realized that while his individual actions were significant, true impact would only occur when society as a whole committed to helping the most vulnerable. That night, Jorge decided to expand his involvement with social projects. He began to envision ways to go beyond merely donating financial resources and focus on initiatives that created structured and sustainable support for those in greatest need. It's not enough to donate a house or a meal. We need to create networks that allow people to rebuild their lives with dignity and independence, he thought as he observed the people around him. The event ended with a record amount raised, and Jorge felt proud to have inspired such generosity. However, as he left the hotel and got into his car, he realized he was still unsettled. We did a lot, but will it be enough? He questioned aloud to his driver. The man who had witnessed the impact of many of Jorge's initiatives replied wisely, "Every action is a piece of a larger puzzle, sir. The important thing is to keep putting the pieces in place." Arriving home, Jorge found the house silent, except for the soft sound of Natalia rocking her baby. He approached her, who was sitting on the couch, still trying to process the sudden change that the night had brought to her life. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" he asked gently. Natalia looked up, visibly moved. "We're fine, thank you. I'm just trying to understand how a stranger could be so kind to us." Jorge smiled, sitting in the armchair across from her. "It's not kindness, Natalia. It's responsibility. What would become of us if we all ignored each other's struggles?" He paused and continued, "But what I want is not just to help you tonight. I want to find a way to help you and others like you have a better life. We can't change the world all at once, but we can create a space where no one feels forgotten." Jorge's words deeply touched Natalia. For the first time in a long while, she felt that someone not only saw her situation, but also believed in her potential to overcome it. "I never knew what it would be like to have someone believe in me like this," she confessed, holding the baby more tightly. "Maybe this is my chance to start over." In that moment, Jorge realized that his mission extended far beyond symbolic gestures or inspiring speeches. It was about building a real and meaningful support system. He didn't know exactly how he would do it, but he was determined to start with Natalia and her baby. The idea of creating a space where vulnerable people could find not just shelter, but also guidance and opportunity began to take shape in his mind. As the night went on, Jorge reflected on what he had learned up to that point. He understood that social support is not just about offering charity. It's about providing pathways for people to rise again and walk with dignity. It's about extending a hand not just to alleviate a moment of pain, but to offer the chance for a better future. That night, as he lay down to sleep, Jorge knew that the commitment he had made to himself and to Natalia marked the beginning of something greater. And although he did not have all the answers yet, he felt he was on the right path. After all, as his father always said, united hands are the ones that truly transform the world. The next morning, Jorge woke up earlier than usual. Despite the previous night being long and filled with emotions, Jorge's sleep had been restless. The image of Natalia and her baby still echoed in his mind, mingling with the anonymous faces of so many others in vulnerable situations he had encountered throughout his life. But the contrast of that scene with the luxury of the event left him especially unsettled. How did we reach a point where such abundance exists alongside such scarcity, he wondered. As he sipped his coffee, Jorge picked up the newspaper and flipped through the headlines. Almost all of them spoke of a growing economy, new ventures, and financial records. But on a smaller, less eye-catching page, he found an article about the increasing number of homeless people in the city. It's always like this, he thought. Inequality is hidden between the folds of the paper, mentioned only when the numbers are too high to ignore. Jorge recalled a conversation with his father years ago when they passed under an overpass where dozens of people lived in makeshift tents. "Why doesn't anyone do anything for them, Dad?" he had asked back then, still young and idealistic. His father replied with a melancholic look, "People do, son, but the truth is that inequality is like a very large wound. Just putting on a band-aid isn't enough. We need to treat the cause. And that requires more than good intentions. It demands commitment. Now, decades later, Jorge understood the depth of those words. He had the resources and the desire to help, but he knew he needed to do more than just sporadic acts of kindness. It was essential to understand the roots of the inequality that left so many Natalias and their babies on the margins of society. That same day, Jorge decided to visit one of the city's shelters, something he hadn't done in a long time. Despite financing various social initiatives, he rarely had the opportunity to see firsthand the impact of those projects. Upon arriving, he was welcomed by the shelter's director, a woman named Mariana, who had dedicated her life to providing support to homeless individuals. "It's always good to have someone like you here, Jorge," she said with a smile, although the dark circles under her eyes showed the weight of a daily struggle. Mariana led him through narrow hallways and makeshift rooms where dozens of people were accommodated. "Most of the people who come here are not just homeless," she explained. "They are without hope. Many lost everything due to health problems, unemployment, or even family crises. And without a support network, they fell into this bottomless pit that is extreme poverty." Jorge listened attentively as Mariana spoke. In one of the rooms, he met a man named Roberto, who shared his story. "I had a job, a house, everything. But when I lost my job, the bills started piling up. First I sold the car, then the furniture. Before I knew it, I had nothing left. No one chooses to be here, but sometimes it's just where you end up." Roberto's words resonated in Jorge's heart. He knew that inequality wasn't just about lack of money, but also about the absence of opportunities and support systems. He began to understand that the line separating his life from Natalia's or Roberto's was thinner than he would like to admit. On his way home, Jorge spent the afternoon researching the causes of social inequality. He read about how lack of access to quality education perpetuated cycles of poverty, how the absence of robust public policies left millions without assistance, and how social prejudices often marginalized those who were already vulnerable. He also came across alarming data. While a small portion of the population concentrated the majority of wealth, millions struggled daily to survive. Jorge knew he was part of that privileged group, but instead of feeling guilty, he felt an even greater responsibility to act. "This isn't about charity, this is about justice," he thought. That evening, Jorge had dinner with Natalia. He wanted to learn more about her story and understand how she had ended up in her current situation. Initially hesitant, Natalia eventually shared details Jorge had never imagined. "I had a simple but stable life," she began. "I worked as a cashier at a supermarket and rented a small room. But when I got pregnant, the father of my child abandoned me. I kept working as long as I could, but after my baby was born, things became difficult. With no one to help me, I lost my job. And over time, I lost the room where we lived. I ended up on the street because I had nowhere else to go." But Natalia's words hit Jorge like a punch to the gut. He had always known inequality existed, but hearing it directly from someone who lived it daily made it all the more real. "No one should have to face this alone," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "If only there were a support network for women like you, maybe your story would be different." Natalia smiled sadly. "Maybe, but things are as they are. What matters is that today I'm here, and that's already more than I expected." The conversation with Natalia reinforced Jorge's determination to use his influence to combat inequality more effectively. He began to sketch out a plan to create a multifunctional support center that would offer not only shelter, but also access to job training, medical care, and emotional support. He knew it was an ambitious project, but he also knew it was necessary. "Natalia, I want you to know that your story will not be in vain," he said. "I want to help you start over, but I also want to ensure that others don't have to go through what you went through." As Jorge spoke, something shifted in Natalia's gaze. For the first time in a long time, she felt that there was someone genuinely willing to fight for her and those like her. "Thank you, Jorge," she replied. "If you can make this happen, you'll be changing not just my life, but the lives of many others." That night, as Jorge reviewed his notes and outlined the first steps of his plan, he realized he was only beginning to grasp the complexity of social inequality. However, he also knew that with determination and hard work, he could start building a fairer future. After all, as he had always believed, change begins with a decision, the decision to act. The days that followed his meeting with Natalia and her baby were transformative for Jorge. He who had always believed in the value of generosity began to see it in a deeper and more practical way. It was no longer just about donating money or participating in charity events. He realized that generosity was a value that needed to permeate every aspect of his life. It was more than just a virtue. It was a commitment to others and to humanity. As he reflected on what he could do, Jorge recalled his father, Edivaldo, who had always been his greatest example of kindness and integrity. Generosity is the only wealth that the more you share, the more it grows, Edivaldo often said. Jorge remembered how, even without the fortune he possessed today, his father always made a point to help anyone he could. There was one particular incident that deeply marked Jorge. As a child, he saw his father bring home an elderly neighbor who had been evicted. At the time, Jorge was too young to fully understand, but now, as an adult, he recognized the magnitude of that gesture. Sitting in his spacious living room, Jorge pondered how that example had shaped his worldview. If my father could do so much with so little, what can I do with everything I have? He wondered, almost challenging himself. With Natalia's story in mind, Jorge began to put into practice a more structured plan to help not only her, but also others in vulnerable situations. He decided that his first major change would be to transform one of his vacant properties into a community support center. The space, originally meant to be a corporate event venue, would be adapted to provide temporary shelter, job training, and psychological support. When he shared the idea with his team, Jorge was met with looks of surprise. "You want to turn one of our most valuable investments into a community center?" asked one of the managers, trying to hide his discomfort. Jorge calmly replied, "Yes, because this is not just an investment. It's about doing something that has real value, something that goes beyond money. This property can generate profit, but it can also create impact. And that's what I choose now." Jorge's decision quickly drew attention. Local media began to highlight his initiative as an example of philanthropy in action, but Jorge wasn't interested in recognition. For him, the true value lay in witnessing lives being transformed. Natalia, on her part, couldn't believe that her story could become a catalyst for something so significant. When Jorge told her about the project, tears filled her eyes. "Jorge, I never imagined that someone could care so much about people like me. You're not just helping, you're giving us a chance to dream again." Jorge smiled. "You deserve this, Natalia, and I want you to be part of it, not just as a beneficiary, but as a partner. You've proven your strength and resilience, and those are qualities we need to help others." Though she hesitated at first, Natalia accepted Jorge's invitation to work at the center as an administrative assistant, helping to organize operations and welcome new families. "I've never done anything like this before," she confessed, but Jorge replied confidently, "No one starts knowing everything. But your story and your determination are already enough to make a difference." As the weeks passed, the center began to take shape. Jorge oversaw every detail, from the design of the dormitories to the selection of volunteer teams. He wanted the space to be more than just a shelter. He wanted it to be a place of dignity and hope. "People need to feel valued here," he told the architects and decorators. "No disposable furniture or makeshift spaces. This will be a place where they feel human, where they can restart with dignity." The center was designed to accommodate up to 50 people at a time, with dedicated areas for job training, group therapy rooms, and a children's space for kids to play and learn while their families sought stability. Jorge also made sure to include partnerships with local businesses to provide job opportunities for participants in the program. When the center finally opened, Jorge organized a simple event, inviting only a few close people and community members. Natalia was one of the speakers at the ceremony. With an emotional voice, she said, "A few months ago, I was out in the rain, not knowing where I would sleep with my baby that night. Today, I'm here, seeing that rain was the beginning of something much greater. Jorge didn't just change my life. He showed that a single act of kindness can be the start of a transformation that reaches many people." Natalia's words deeply touched everyone present. Jorge, watching from a distance, felt an indescribable emotion. It wasn't pride in the conventional sense, but a genuine satisfaction in knowing he was using his resources and position for something that truly mattered. Jorge realized that generosity wasn't just about grand gestures, but also about the small daily acts that create cumulative impact. He began implementing social responsibility practices in his companies, encouraging his employees to participate in community actions and creating mentorship programs for young people in vulnerable situations. In conversations with his friends and business partners, Jorge shared his reflections. Generosity shouldn't be something we do only when we have spare time or money. It needs to be a central value in our lives, because in the end, that's what makes us truly human. Jorge's example began to inspire others. Friends, business partners, and even strangers started seeking ways to contribute to the center or create their own initiatives. Jorge understood that his decision to act not only helped those in need directly, but also encouraged others to do the same. One night, while talking with Natalia after a long day at the center, Jorge reflected aloud, "You know, Natalia, I never imagined that rainy night would change my life as much as it changed yours. You and your baby taught me something that no amount of money could buy. True wealth lies in giving." Natalia smiled, holding Jorge's hand. "And you showed me that there are still people willing to see beyond the surface. Thank you for believing in me, Jorge." In that moment, it became clear that Jorge's generosity was not just a value, but a legacy that would continue to grow, reaching people he might never meet, but whose lives would be transformed by his actions. At first, Jorge didn't fully comprehend the extent of the impact of his gesture in offering help to Natalia and her baby that rainy night. It seemed like something simple, giving them the key to his home so they could shelter from the cold. However, as the days went by, he began to realize that this small act of kindness had triggered a wave of changes far beyond what he could have anticipated. Natalia, who had once viewed the world through a filter of distrust and exhaustion, began to regain a spark in her eyes. In the temporary safety provided by Jorge's home, she was finally able to think about the future for the first time in months. She started to reorganize her life, seeking employment and connecting with people who could help her start over. All of this was possible because in a moment of desperation, someone decided to take action. The most immediate and visible impact was, of course, on Natalia's life and that of her baby. However, the power of that act extended far beyond that. Jorge soon realized that his own worldview was changing. He, who already participated in charity events and donated to various causes, began to question how he could become more deeply involved. After all, if such a simple decision could transform a life, what could he do with careful planning and adequate resources? Jorge started to explore the idea of exponential impact. He wondered how a single gesture could inspire others, generating a domino effect of transformation. It was like throwing a stone into a lake. The ripples didn't stop at the point of initial impact, but spread out, reaching unexpected places. Jorge wanted to understand how he could maximize those ripples, expanding the reach of his actions to touch more lives. As Jorge delved deeper into social projects, he began to hear stories that reaffirmed the power of a single act of kindness. During a visit to the community support center he had inaugurated, he met a woman named Lucia, who had been welcomed by the project just a few days earlier. Like Natalia, she faced extreme difficulties, but her story held a detail that caught Jorge's attention. "I was almost ready to give up," Lucia confessed. "I had lost everything, my home, my job, and even my faith in people. But when I heard what you did for Natalia, something changed in me. I thought, if there are still people like him, maybe there is hope for me too." So I came here and found something I didn't expect. Dignity. Lucia's words touched Jorge deeply. He realized that the impact of his action wasn't confined to those directly involved. It also reached those who heard the story and felt inspired to believe again, to try again. Every testimony like this, Jorge thought, is proof that small actions can lead to gigantic transformations. As Jorge reflected on the transformative power of kindness, he began to ponder human nature. Why do some people act when they see suffering while others remain passive? He concluded that often it isn't a lack of compassion, but a feeling of helplessness. We think we can't make a difference, so we do nothing, he remarked during a meeting with his team. Jorge began to advocate for the idea that every act, no matter how small, holds value. Helping one person doesn't solve all the world's problems, but it changes that person's world. And that is immense, he would say. He started to incorporate this thought into his speeches and charity events, encouraging others to see their actions not as drops in the ocean, but as the beginning of a tide. The most interesting realization, however, was how the kindness Jorge showed that night also transformed him. Previously, he viewed his philanthropic efforts as important, but separate from his personal life. Now he understood that generosity wasn't just something he did, it was something that shaped him as a human being. He began to notice small changes in himself. He became more patient, more attuned to the needs of others, more willing to listen and understand. Even in his professional interactions, Jorge started to incorporate a spirit of collaboration and compassion that hadn't been so evident before. Kindness doesn't just transform others, it transforms those who practice it, he wrote in an article he published in a local magazine. Meanwhile, Jorge and Natalia's story began to circulate not only within the local community, but also on social media and in the news. Many felt inspired by his decision to help and wondered how they could do something similar. Jorge started receiving messages from people across the country, sharing their own stories of overcoming challenges or asking for guidance on how they could get involved in social actions. One of the most memorable moments came when a group of students from a public school visited Jorge's community center. They presented a project they had developed, inspired by his story and Natalia's, a program to collect food and clothing for families experiencing homelessness. Jorge was moved to see how his action had planted seeds in young hearts, creating a new generation of agents of transformation. Over time, Jorge began to see that gesture that night as the start of a legacy. He knew he couldn't solve all the world's problems, but he also knew he didn't have to. Each of us has the capacity to do something, he would say, and together we can create an impact that no one could achieve alone. Natalia, for her part, became an important ally in this legacy. Working alongside Jorge at the community center, she was living proof that an opportunity could change everything. She often shared her story with new families arriving at the shelter, offering words of encouragement and showing that a fresh start was possible. If Jorge hadn't reached out to me that night, I don't know where I would be today, she would say. But he didn't just help me, he taught me that I can also help others, and that's something I will carry with me forever. The power of a single act of kindness, Jorge discovered, lies in its ability to echo. It begins with a simple decision, but its consequences expand in unpredictable and profound ways. He saw this in Natalia, in Lucia, in the students from the public school, and even in himself. And as he continued his journey, Jorge understood that gesture in the rain was not merely a response to an immediate need. It was the beginning of a continuous transformation, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, carries a power that can change lives, hearts, and even the world. In the months that followed, Jorge observed how gratitude became a powerful force in his life and in the lives of those around him. He had never thought much about the depth of this feeling before, but the gestures and words of thanks he received from Natalia and the people helped by the community center began to transform his perspective. Natalia, in particular, expressed her gratitude in ways that went beyond words. Although she was still rebuilding her life, she made it a point to contribute to the functioning of the community center. I know I can never repay everything you've done for me and my baby, Jorge, but I want to help others find hope. just like you gave me hope that night." These words were always spoken with sincerity and an emotion that deeply touched Jorge. He, in turn, never accepted them as just a simple compliment. "Natalia, you are already giving back. Just by being here, helping other families, is the greatest expression of gratitude I could receive." Jorge began to notice that gratitude was not merely a natural response to what had been done, but also a bond that connected people. Every time someone expressed their thanks, he saw how it created a positive cycle, motivating him to continue. Gratitude was not an end in itself, but a catalyst for more actions and more connections. During one of the weekly meetings at the community center, Jorge had the chance to hear testimonials from families who had been helped. One story was that of Roberto, a man who found a job after participating in one of the professional training programs offered by the center. "I had nothing but despair," Roberto said, "but when I came here, I didn't just find practical help. I found people who believed in me, something I no longer did myself." Roberto approached Jorge after the meeting and thanked him personally. "I know you heard my story in there, but I want to say one thing. What you did for me, and so many others, is more than an act of generosity. You gave us something that no one can take away, the chance to start over. Thank you." These words lingered with Jorge for days. He had never thought of his gestures as something so profound, but he began to realize that the gratitude of those he helped often carried a weight far greater than he had imagined. It was proof that his actions were having a real and lasting impact. While the gratitude of others was moving, Jorge started to recognize that he himself had much to be thankful for. He was grateful to be in a position to help, grateful for everything he had learned from the people he encountered along the way, and, above all, grateful for the opportunity to transform his own life while transforming the lives of others. One night, in a conversation with Natalia, he shared this thought. "You know, Natalia, when I saw you that rainy night, I thought I was just helping you and your baby. But looking back, I realized that you also helped me. You helped me see the world differently, to understand how rich life is when we dedicate ourselves to something bigger than ourselves." Natalia smiled. "I never thought of it that way, Jorge. But I'm glad to know that in some way, my story brought you something positive. I think that's what people should do for each other, help each other grow." Jorge also began to value gratitude as a powerful tool for strengthening communities. He realized that when people acknowledge the support they receive, they feel more connected to the group and more motivated to contribute. At the community center, this was evident. Participants who managed to get back on their feet often returned to help in some way, whether as volunteers or by sharing their stories to inspire others. One of those moments happened during the center's year-end celebration. Jorge organized a small event to thank the volunteers, staff, and participants for their hard work and achievements throughout the year. During the event, one of the mothers, Joanna, asked to speak. "I came to this center with nothing but my daughter in my arms. Today, I have a job, a home, and above all, hope. I wouldn't be here without all of you. I especially want to thank Jorge because he showed us that even in our darkest moments, someone can believe in us. And that makes all the difference." The applause filled the room, but what Jorge felt was more than pride. He felt a deep gratitude for being part of something so meaningful. He knew that his life had changed just as much as the lives of those people, and that was a gift for which he would be eternally thankful. Jorge began to incorporate the practice of gratitude into his daily life, both personally and professionally. He encouraged his team to reflect on the impact of their actions and to recognize the contributions of each member. "Gratitude isn't just about thanking for what we receive," he said in a meeting. "It's also about acknowledging what others do for us and how we can give back." This spirit of gratitude started to permeate all aspects of his initiatives, creating an environment where everyone felt valued and motivated. More than that, Jorge realized that gratitude was contagious. The more he expressed his own gratitude, the more it was reflected back by those around him. Reflecting on everything that had happened since that rainy night, Jorge realized that gratitude had become a guiding force in his life. It reminded him that even in the face of challenges, there was always something to be thankful for. It also propelled him to continue his work, knowing that every small action could have a much greater impact than he could imagine. For Jorge, gratitude was not just a feeling, it was a practice, a philosophy of life. And as he continued his journey, he made it a point to share this vision with everyone around him, creating a legacy of kindness, hope, and connection. Jorge knew there was much more to be done, but he felt empowered by the certainty that he was on the right path, because in the end, gratitude was what gave meaning to everything, and he was deeply thankful for that. The story of Jorge, Natalia, and her baby became a living example of how kindness and generosity can transcend barriers of inequality and create profound change. That rainy night was not just a turning point in Natalia's life, but also a pivotal moment for Jorge, and later for many others who were touched by the impact of his action. Jorge never sought recognition, but the ripple effect of his story began to inspire others in unexpected ways. Friends, business partners, and even strangers reached out to learn more about what had happened and how they could do something similar. The generosity and transformation he provided not only helped Natalia, but also sparked a desire for action in others. Gradually, Jorge realized that his story was becoming a symbol of hope. People started sharing their own vision of what generosity could do in their communities. He received messages from business owners who felt inspired to launch initiatives to support homeless families, from young people who began fundraising campaigns in their schools, and even from individuals who simply decided to offer direct help to those in need. "I never thought something so small could touch so many lives," Jorge remarked to Natalia one quiet afternoon as they organized an event at the community center. "But I think people need concrete examples to believe it's possible." Natalia smiled, adjusting the baby in her arms. "You didn't just give an example, Jorge. You showed that sometimes change begins with something simple, reaching out." With the growing impact of his story, Jorge began organizing meetups and lectures to share what he had learned. He didn't just want to tell his story, he also wanted to help others find their own paths to make a difference. In one of these lectures, he emphasized the importance of acting, even when the actions seemed small or insignificant. "I had no idea what would happen when I decided to help Natalia that night," he told the audience. "But I learned that kindness has a power that goes beyond our understanding. It doesn't matter the size of the gesture, as long as it's made sincerely. We all have something to offer." Jorge's lectures began attracting more and more people. He spoke about his journey with humility, highlighting that anyone could do what he had done. "It's not about money or position," he explained. "It's about seeing the other and choosing not to ignore." Among the many touched by Jorge's story was Clara, a retired teacher who attended one of his lectures in a local community. After hearing Jorge, she decided to open her own home to children in need of tutoring. "You made me realize that I don't need to have much to do something," she wrote in a letter to Jorge. "I just needed to open my eyes to what I already had and how I could use it to help." Others began to replicate Jorge's community center model, adapting it to the needs of their own communities. He witnessed how his initial action inspired a network of generosity and care that grew organically. Each new project, each new initiative was a testament to the impact that a single decision can have. Over time, Jorge began to reflect on what his journey represented. He had never planned to become a public figure or a symbol of generosity, but he accepted that role with gratitude and responsibility. He understood that his work was not just about helping directly, but also about inspiring others to do the same. "If my story can make just one person choose to act, then it has already been worthwhile," he often said, "because I know that this action will generate more actions, creating an effect that can reach far beyond what I could do alone." What surprised Jorge the most was how inspiration flowed in both directions. He felt motivated and strengthened by the stories of those touched by his work. Every act of kindness he saw or heard about fueled his determination to continue. Jorge knew that the work was just beginning. He started to expand his initiatives, creating programs for young leaders and providing support to other communities facing similar challenges. His goal was not just to help directly, but to empower others to become agents of change. Natalia, now an active figure in the community center, also began sharing her story at events and gatherings. Her journey from vulnerability to overcoming challenges became a powerful example of how the right opportunities can transform lives. "I am living proof that an act of kindness can change everything," she said. "And because of that, I want to help others find the strength to start over." Together, Jorge and Natalia built a legacy that went far beyond that rainy night. They showed that kindness not only saves lives, but also inspires new possibilities. And as they continued their journey, both knew that the greatest lesson of all was this: the impact of generosity never ends. It continues to expand, one gesture at a time, reaching places and people we might never imagine. The story of Jorge and Natalia is not just about help or charity. It's a story of human connection, of how kindness can transcend differences and create a more compassionate world. Above all, it is a reminder that regardless of who we are or what we have, we can all be an inspiration to someone. As Jorge looked out at the horizon, reflecting on the path he had traveled, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the lives he had touched, but also for the lessons those lives had taught him. He knew his journey was far from over, but he felt confident that as long as there were people willing to act, the world could, little by little, become a better place. And so he continued to walk, driven by the certainty that the inspiration he had received and shared was just the beginning of something much greater.